Jesus taught his followers to pray that God's will would be done on earth as it is in heaven. If we really meant that, how different would our actions be? Are we blessing the earth or destroying it? Modern science and ancient Celtic Christianity both suggest a better way of being, exercising an ethic of stewardship, not dominion. Join us for On Earth as It Is in Heaven, a provocative 7-week Darkwood Brew series exploring our home, our faith, and what it means when they converge. Hi, welcome to Darkwood Brew, where ancient Christian mystical practice is blended with modern interactive web technology, world-class jazz, arts, biblical scholarship, and, well, you never know exactly what's going to happen. Darkwood Brew is more than just a broadcast on the internet or a gathering in a coffee house. We're truly a spiritual gathering in which we unite with the world to open ourselves up to the Spirit of God, to explore different themes and energies in our lives using this ancient Christian practice based on the ancient practice of Lectio Divina. If you're joining us for the first time, you're joining us for part 2 of our series On Earth as It Is in Heaven, exploring the relationship between faith and the environment. This series, we're partnering with the National United Church of Christ, who is simultaneously holding their own campaign called Mission for One Earth. Tonight's subject, wildness. Wildness. What do you think of when you think of wildness? Well, chances are it's not that. No. No, we'll be exploring the second day of creation in Genesis 2 and the concept of wildness, not only of creation, but what they may suggest about the wildness of God. Your encounter with this episode will be significantly deepened tonight also if you will consider a question that's been nagging you. Any question at all, but what is it that's recently been nagging you regarding which you could use some insight from a higher power? We'll be offering an opportunity to explore that question privately later in the episode in our encounter with wildness. But before we go any further, let's take a look at what happened last week.
It's wild having never been a guest before. I found myself this morning getting nervous. It's like, oh my gosh, will I be any good or will I totally suck? Matter matters. Matter matters.
Matter matters.
Yeah. And you think about this experientially, all of us have this innate set, deep in our intuitive selves, that something is profoundly wonderful and right with the world. And then there's this deep longing that we have. We don't have to take Genesis 1 as some scientific account of how things happened, but rather Genesis 1 is part of that deep intuitive structure of our faith tradition, which is really talking about how God self-discloses God's very self as love.
Well, I neglected to say that our Skype guest this evening is Megan Pritchard, who is the national coordinator for the United Church of Christ for their Mission for One Earth campaign. And Chris Alexander has been monitoring the results of that campaign so far. And Chris, you want to tell us a little bit about what's been happening?
Yeah, they did a update just yesterday, and the first goal, of course, was the 1,000,000 hours of Earth Care time, and they are up to 12,370. That's
right.
good. So that's a
One
good
week.
thing for the
That's good.
1 week, yeah. Goal number 2 is 100,000 trees, and they've done 4794 as of yesterday. So we still got a lot to go there, but
Yeah.
more is coming up, and Arbor Day is coming up, so we'll be able to pick up on that, I'm sure. Goal number 3 is 100,000 advocacy letters to politicians or newspapers or letters to the editor about environmental care and how we can help with that. So that is up to 1910 out of 100,000. So we've got a few more to go on that as well.
Yeah, maybe we should have provided paper in the coffee house to
Yeah.
start writing some letters. Yeah.
In fact, here at our church at Countryside in Omaha, we have a couple events planned where we have some letter writing activity going. So that's coming up soon. Those numbers will go up quickly.
Yeah, I've heard about churches. In fact, Countryside is one of them. Is going to holding events at their churches where they're featuring a number of different environmental concerns, and then just simply inviting people to write letters about the concern of their choice. And, yeah, it's a good idea.
Yeah, whole kinds of events all over this area, at least that I know of. The conference has been reporting on all kinds of things. And on the website for the UCC, there's all kinds of stories that have been posted, so you can always get on there and get some good ideas for what maybe your congregation could be doing.
Great. So you can if you want to join with all of us in that campaign, we're just simply inviting all of our viewership to join the UCC in that. They're inviting the whole nation and really the world to participate. If you get online at ucc.org, you'll find that For One Earth campaign. 50 days from starting Easter Sunday through Pentecost Sunday that's May 19th.
Yeah.
So let's get those million hours done and the letters and so forth.
And the trees.
Yeah, that'll be great. Just want to also mention that during this series we are featuring also a book by J. Philip Newell. Part of what we're doing is taking our cue from Celtic Christianity, and one of the worldwide experts on Celtic Christianity is J. Philip Newell, who will be a guest for us on a future episode. But also, if you want to pick up his book, The Book of Creation, I think I found it on Amazon for under $8. If you don't have that yet, you can deepen your experience. I know there are a number of small groups who are using that book alongside this series, and we're pulling our themes of creation from that. Also, if you care to help us out, you can hit the donate button on our website too, and you can help keep Darkwood Brew alive. We're very fortunate we have a matching grant right now in effect, so every dollar you contribute, whether it be a one-time gift or as a weekly or a monthly offering, that's doubled right now. So we really appreciate your support, and we've had some really good support in this last week, and thank you. Keep those coming. Before we go on to our Skype guest, we want to also hear from a guest we had on over a year ago. His name is Scott Russell Sanders. He's an environmental activist and author and writing professor at the University of Indiana. We had him on for an entire series, our series called Hope, A Pessimist's Guide. And I had flown to Bloomington to interview him, and during the course of that interview, Scott Russell Sanders had some very interesting things to say about wildness. Let's go to Scott Russell Sanders and hear him for a moment.
Actually very highly organized. It's not reckless. So if you look at the behavior of animals is very purposeful. Mm-hmm. It's about food, it's about reproduction, it's about territory, it's about either being a predator or evading predators. It's not disorderly. It's quite orderly. So I think the way we often use the word wild, like a wild party, is a misuse of the word. But another key thing about wildness is that the earth, like our own bodies, has an extraordinary self-healing power. My hands are kind of beaten up right now because of some house maintenance work I've been doing lately. But you cut through your skin, or you get a bad blister or whatever, or you break a bone, and all things being equal, if you're reasonably healthy, your body will mend itself. Now, it won't mend from any degree of trauma, we know that, nor will the earth. But if a forest is cut down here in Indiana, and you leave that ground alone, you're going to get a forest again eventually, because that's what the earth will produce. So that resilience, that power of renewal, again, it's not limitless. You can trash a forest, you can to the point where it won't recover. You can certainly poison a river to the point where in humanly meaningful length of time, it's never going to recover. If you drive a species to extinction, clearly it's not going to recover. But within bounds, the Earth's resilience which is essentially what wildness is. It's the ongoingness of all the natural processes. Within bounds, if the damage is not too severe, the body will heal itself, a piece of ground will heal itself, the oceans will heal themselves, rivers will run clear. And that power of renewal in the wild world is a great source of hope, I believe.
So, what's the opposite of wildness?
Regimentation, which tries to freeze an institution, a mind, an organism at a certain state and fix it there. Wildness is a flow. It's always moving. Every organism is flow. Right now, it's not only the fluids in our bodies that are flowing around. We're breathing in and breathing out. We're taking in the atmosphere constantly. And we have to drink, we have to eat, and we have to excrete. And that flow is essential to wildness. So the opposite of that is fixity, is the effort to fix something. So a machine doesn't evolve. A machine is fixed. And it has certain virtues. We use machines all the time, and they have certain very valuable traits to them, but they're not wild. And their lack of wildness has to do with the fact that they're fixed. They also don't reproduce themselves. They don't grow. They don't evolve. And that capacity to change, that capacity to adapt, and that continuous flow, those are qualities of wildness. And the opposite of that, it seems to me, is fixity. And it applies to ideas as well. One of the problems with fundamentalism, whether it's fundamentalism in any religion or fundamentalism in economics, where you believe, you've got your economic theory that, say, free markets will solve all problems, and you simply hold to that theory. There's fundamentalism in science, where you're just convinced this scientific theory is the only one, and you just hold to that. Fundamentalism is fixed, whereas real human thought flows. It's interrogative, it asks questions, it's open to new evidence.
Great thoughts indeed. Hey, before we move on to everybody's laughing at me. What did I just do? Before we move on to Megan, I want to also acknowledge our band over here, who's been stellar already. But want to just you guys are going to be doing some work for us later.
Yeah,
on
we
the
got
episode.
a couple of things coming up later in the episode. We're going to do 2 Chuck Moronic tunes. Time Essence will be the feature, and Blessed Be will be Communion. But I want to introduce the fellows very quickly. Ron Cooley on the guitar. Bobo Bennett on the drums, Jorge Nila on the saxophone, and Ricky Williams on the bass.
All right.
Back to you, Chief.
All right. Sounds good. Well, we're very pleased to be joined by Megan Pritchard at this time. And Megan, it's good to have you on the program.
It's great to be here.
I don't see you yet, but I'm sure you're there someplace. Oh, there you are. There you are. I know you can't see us right now.
Right.
But we can see you, so we have a slightly unfair advantage here. But Megan, I got to know you back in it's about 2003, I think.
2005.
Oh, 2005. Okay, well, time flies when you're having fun. And you were at University Congregational Church in Seattle, Washington.
That's right. And you were a guest preacher there in late October 2005. And you were talking about the Phoenix Affirmations, these 12 statements about love of God, love of neighbor, and love of self. And you said, and there's a group of us that are going to walk that across the country and talk about it. And I thought, that's me. I have to go. So that was the beginning of it.
Yeah, that walk took place with Crosswalk America in 2006, and I was just realizing that on Tuesday, that's the 7th anniversary of that walk.
Right. That's right.
So I think some of those core walkers are actually online watching tonight. So hello, Crosswalk America walkers. So now you are doing what for the United Church of Christ right now?
Well, I have two hats that I wear. One is that I'm the interim pastor at Prospect Congregational United Church of Christ here in Seattle. And the other hat, which relates more directly to what we're talking about today, is that I am the Mission 41 Earth coordinator. I am part of a huge team of people working through the United Church of Christ on Mission 41 Earth. Now, I heard you mention the three goals: the million Earth Care hours, the 100,000 trees planted all over the world, and then the 100,000 letters of Earth Care advocacy written to elected officials and to news media. So we're starting. We're on our way.
Yeah. So what's been happening with that campaign? Below the numbers.
Well, there's a part on the Mission 41 Earth website where you can see stories that we've done, where we've picked up information from different churches all around the country who have all kinds of things planned. Now, I heard you mention that you are doing some things as well. There are churches that are planting trees. There are churches that are having letter writing stations during their fellowship hour to write letters to their legislators about earth issues. There are congregations that are doing community gardens and that are doing film series about environmental issues. All sorts of things. And churches continue to write into the website and tell us what their plans are and how they are carrying them out. And it's very exciting to hear from churches all over the country that are doing these things. It's really wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah. I was yesterday I was out actually picking up some trash out kind of in front of the house that kind of collected along the street. And then I was doing some gardening as well. And also was shopping and was looking at fish and kind of looking at some farm-raised fish and versus wild caught, and going with the wild caught, and was realizing, all those things were actually just little tiny bits of Earth Care without even realizing it.
That's right. So did you count those hours?
Well, I will now.
Okay.
I understand that even watching Darkwood Brew counts as Earth Care hours. It's part of our contemplative practice.
That's right. So everybody who's watching today, they can log on to ucc.org/earth. And on the bottom left part of that website page, it says something about report your hours here. And you click on that and you can report everything that you've been doing to participate in Mission 41 Earth.
Great. What do you?
And you don't even have to be a member of the UCC to do this.
Right.
So this is open to anyone who's watching this program today.
Exactly. Yeah. And around the world.
Yeah. That's right.
Great. Well, I know we have some Australian viewers on, even on the live episode right now, so you too can plant a tree down there or write to your own representatives and count that as Earth Care hours too. Yeah. Well, Megan, what are some of the key issues in your view that like if one did want to write a letter or where they could use some advocacy, what are some of those key issues right now that are really pressing in your mind?
Well, we have actually listed on the website, I think it's under the button Participate. We've listed a number of letters that we have drafted that people can then click on and add their names. There's a letter about climate change legislation. There's a letter about the Farm Bill. I'm trying to remember what all the letters are. There's a letter about Bristol Bay in Alaska where there's a proposal for a mine that would endanger a lot of rivers in that area where there's a healthy salmon population, and there are Native American populations there that depend on those rivers and those salmon for food. So it becomes a justice issue on multiple levels. And there are a number of other letters that are also posted on that website. So that's all happening on the national level. People can also write letters to their mayor of their city or to their state legislators about things that are happening in their areas, their vicinities.
Great, great. Well, you've been involved with environmental activism for some time, and now what is it that got you interested to begin with?
You know, I have always been interested in environmental issues just from the time I was in about third or fourth grade. There was a woman who came to church and showed us a movie all about pollution and all of these, billowing smokestacks and things. And so the seed was planted early on. When I finished the walk and I came back to Seattle, I worked for about a year at a place called the Sightline Institute, which is a sustainability think tank. And I just absorbed all sorts of things about the good work that they were doing there. And so by the time that I went to seminary a year later, really I was looking at not only feeling a call to go to seminary, but also how does my faith journey intersect with environmental issues, and how do those talk to each other? So I've been continuing to stand at that intersection ever since then, and try to figure out how do people of faith live into a world that is confronted with climate change and the ways that we have changed this planet that could use some healing. And for me, the faith part of that journey is really important as a way to frame that whole way of thinking about it.
Great. So how does your faith in particular inform your environmental activism? What is it about the Christian faith or our elder brothers and sisters in the Jewish faith? What is it about that path that has sensitized you to the environment? Because we're used to hearing in the news reports how if you're a Christian, you don't care about the environment. It's here to play, not to stay, or what have you. Just use up the world's resources, and because God will provide this infinite supply, supposedly.
Right.
What makes your faith different?
Well, for me, the faith journey is if God is in all of creation, which I believe that God is in all of creation, then how we treat creation says something about our relationship with God. And so we have to get this piece figured out. There's a book by Sally McFaig called A New Climate for Theology, God, the World, and Global Warming. And she really talks about the theology of climate change. And one of the words that she brings up is the Greek word oikos, which means household. So she talks about the planet as being our home, our house. And she says, there's two different ways to live. One is to live as if this is a hotel. And you know how when you're in a hotel, you use up all the towels and you dump them on the floor, and you take long hot showers because you're not the one paying the water bill. And you waste things because somebody else is going to come in and clean it all up. But when you're living in your own home, she proposes that there are three main rules to live by. One is you take only your share. And the second one is you clean up after yourself. And the third one is you keep the house in good repair for others. So taking only your share, if you look at how we live here in North America, and specifically in the United States has something like 4% of the world's population, and we use about 25% of the world's resources. So if we were to do, there are different websites you can go to figure out your carbon footprint. And some of those, at the end of them, they will say, if everybody lived the way that you live, we would need 12 planets just to provide all the resources. So taking only your share means how can you live so that you only take up one planet worth of resources instead of 12. For cleaning up after yourself, if we take out a forest in order to have the wood to build houses and to make paper and all that sort of thing, are we replanting forests? Wangari Maathai, you've probably heard of her. She was in Africa. She died a year or so ago. She took that very seriously to reforest a lot of deforested areas in Africa. And over her lifetime, she planted over 30 million trees, getting other people involved, not just by herself, but started the whole Greenbelt movement in Africa to reforest areas. And then keeping the planet in good repair for others. We have to look at, how are we using fossil fuels? How are we emitting things into the atmosphere? Is that keeping things in good repair? Or are there other alternatives, other ways that we can look at our carbon footprint and decrease what we're using and be willing to share better?
Yeah. That's interesting, that hotel analogy you give. It seems like if you have this view that we're here to play, not to stay, so to speak, as I've heard in one sector of Christianity, that's kind of how the world is like a big hotel room. Throw your towels on the floor and use all the water and what have you. But I hear you coming from a different angle. You specifically said, if you see God in and through creation.
Mm-hmm.
So it sounds like perhaps one of the differences is seeing, instead of God as separate from creation, that God is actually intrinsically a part of creation. Is that where you're coming from?
Yes. And J. Philip Newell talks about that in the second chapter of his book of creation, when he's talking about the wildness, the wild energy of creation. And it can be very scary because it can be destructive if you think of lightning strikes starting forest fires and things. But it's also, that wildness, everything is created out of that wildness. If you think of Big Bang Theory, that it took that huge explosion of energy to create everything that we have now. All of creation comes out of that sort of wild energy. So, if God is in all of creation, that doesn't mean it's safe. It means, there's going to be that wild creativity happening in all sorts of different ways.
Yeah. So when you talk about God being in creation, I know a number of Christians over time have been worried about, well, if God's in creation, does that mean we worship, a deer or, what have you? Does that mean that we worship the creation, or is there a difference between creation and the creator in any way in your mind?
Yeah, I think all of creation is in the creator. Be a way to look at it, that we are in God. God is in us and we are in God. But I think God is also both immanent and transcendent. So there's more to it. There's more to God than just creation. Right. But people have different ideas on that.
So something that has been created does not define God, but maybe God defines the thing that's been created.
Right. And the thing that's been created, it carries some small piece of God.
Yeah. That analogy you use also about, drawing from Sally McFaig reminds me of, a lot of people, they may or may not agree that God's essence is in creation, which is a deeply Celtic concept, that creation comes from God's essence, and that then God has arranged that essence in certain ways. But even if you didn't hold to that, if you just simply took seriously God's creation of these things, I mean, if I had one of my children created something and I just kind of threw it around or you broke it or didn't really care, I mean, I'm thinking, well, wait a minute, this is my child. She made this. I'm going to take. I love this child, and so I'm going to take extra special care, and to think about everything we see around us is a part of that creation.
Right.
Created by someone who not only do we love, but who loves us beyond our wildest imagination.
Yes.
Why wouldn't we treat it with respect and dignity?
Right. So one of the things that we can think about then is, how are we connected to that? How are we connected to the rhythms of the seasons? How are we connected to the nature that is all around us and that is actually a part of us? We where's the wildness that's happening in us and all around us? I think our lives can get really. I think your previous film clip from Scott
Sanders, yes, Scott Russell
Yes.
Sanders.
He was talking about things getting regimented.
Yes.
And I think about how our lives can get so regimented that, if it's Monday, well, then we get up to the alarm and we go to our job and we, if you ask somebody, what are you doing at 2:30 on Monday, they will know because they can look on their calendar. And, there's certainly advantages to that. It creates a certain amount of organization, but it can also, box us in some ways if that's not really what we're called to be doing, or if it's not life-giving to us. And actually that was one of the wild things that I did, was going on the walk, because I had the job, I had the house, I had the cats and the car and all of that, and you came along and talked about this Phoenix affirmations and walking across the country, and I just thought, okay, I have to go. It just feels like something wild is happening in me, and I'm going to just fling myself off this cliff and not know where I'm landing. So I moved my things out of my house and I rented it out. I found someone to take care of my cats. I found a place to leave my car. I quit my job and did some fundraising, and off we went. And that was a wild thing, but it felt like a call. It felt like something that I needed to do to break out of the regimented way that my life had been.
Right.
So
I was really impressed by that, by the way, because you were working with the Seattle Symphony and you'd moved out of that job. But it wasn't like you were acting chaotically, like you were just like, well, what the heck, today I'll do this, tomorrow I'll do that. But there was reason and rhyme to it, a rhythm and harmony to it. It had to do with the sense of inner call, that wildness was in the inner call, not in simply it wasn't chaos.
Yeah, and I have to say that the call felt like, oh, I'm supposed to go do this. This feels like something I need to do. And I thought, okay, God, I'm going to show up to this. I'm going to do this thing, knowing that no matter how much I put into this, it's not going to be enough to make this happen, so that there needed to be more people involved, more things coming together than what I could personally put together myself. And so I mentioned that image of feeling like I'm flinging myself off a cliff. And I have to say, it just felt like all these hands came out and caught me, because this was something that felt like I need to do this. This is important. And it turned out it was important to a lot of other people too. People in my church, people at my job, people, just all kinds of people stepped forward and said, well, I want to give you some money for this, or I can't give you money, but I'm going to make you socks. Do you remember my socks with the days of the week on them?
Different pair for every day of the week, I remember,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so people just stepped forward and said, I want to buy your shoes for you, or I want to, whatever I can do to help, because they believed that this was worth doing.
Right.
And so,
one of the insights that we were kind of drawing on last week about, looking at the 7 days of creation in Genesis 1 is that God does more kind of ordering and arranging than creatio ex nihilo, creation out of nothing, and that what God is doing in creation, if you look at that account carefully, is creating and empowering other entities to create, and then setting these entities into relationships that are mutually fruitful and empowering of each other to be co-creators. And that experience on the walk, I think you experienced something that was very similar to that. It was a creative act. It was joining together with others and empowering others and feeling empowered by them in mutually fruitful ways. Yeah.
So what we were talking about before about the rigidity and having to do something wild once in a while to break out. I really debated, do I see if I can take a leave from my job, or do I quit my job? And I realized that if I quit my job to go on this walk, I was going to be listening for God in a very different way all along the highway, to see where my life was going next. Whereas if I just took a leave and I came back to the same job, it was sort of like this was a blip, and now I'm back and I'm not changed in the same way.
Yeah. Interesting how we have we kind of have our temperature controlled lives, and we flip on the light switch, and suddenly we literally, for the first time, in all of human history, this last century, we could actually turn night into day, and our environment, our atmosphere is so controlled, and we just do that. We don't even get down on our knees and say, Hallelujah, Lord God, when we turn on a light switch, and suddenly we transform night into day. We just like, turn on the light switch, or control the temperature, and there seems like there are times we need to get out on the road, so to speak, to actually get out of that rigidity and that box that we've surrounded ourselves with, to sense that raw edge of God, create a raw edge in ourselves that join together with the raw edge of God, and we hear new things. And you heard a new thing in your own experience of wildness, didn't you?
I did. About halfway across the country, we were staying at Eden Seminary in their dorms, and one very hot, humid night, several of us were sitting out by this fountain in the quad, and we're just talking, and Scott Grissel said, "So, Megan, have you ever thought of going to seminary?" And I said, "No." And he said something like, "Well, you might think about it." And I thought, I'm not going to seminary. And then a few days later, somebody else said it, and then somebody else said it, and somebody else said it. So it felt like about 20 people said it, and Bishop Spong was the last one on the walk who said, "You need to do this." And so I thought, okay, God, here we go. I feel those doors swinging open. I'm going to go, and I'm not quite sure what I'm doing there, but because I know I'm not going to be a minister, right? And God laughs. So
yeah, that's great. Yeah, well, just coincidentally, Bishop Spong was at Countryside Community Church this weekend, and it was actually remembering the walk fondly and the walkers. But so you get out onto that creative edge, you get out of that rigidity, that temperature-controlled lifestyle, and you start it really can change things. Maybe that's why we like to surround ourselves with all of the controls.
Well, exactly, because we want to have some control. We want to say, okay, here's the edges of the box, and this is where it's safe. But safe is not necessarily a life, that you got to break out of safe. And anytime we try to put God in a box, too, God doesn't live in a box.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we want to actually take God out even further out of that box now during the episode. Before we come back to you, we want to look at our passage this evening, which is from Genesis chapter 1, verses 6 through 8. And this is the second day of creation. And if you're just joining us, if you missed last week, if you've been a regular and you missed last week too, we're doing this in a little bit different format. We've normally pretty much done our Pneuma reading in a very speedy way, but we're slowing it down because we wanted to actually open ourselves up to that wildness of God, take God out of that box a bit, and have a bit more raw personal encounter with Spirit. And so what we'll be doing is you'll hear the passage read actually a total of 4 times with 2 full minutes where the passage is read, and then we're going to ask you to contemplate something in particular. And we'll be doing that for 4 times. Now, before you turn off your computer and say, "Forget it, I'm scared to death, I can't do this for 8 minutes," we had quite an amazing response last week from this exercise. A lot of people said, "Oh my God, something occurred to me that had never occurred to me before regarding the question that I brought to the episode." If you will, we're going to take 30 seconds and just kind of let the band kind of take us into this exercise. If you will call to mind that question that we asked at the beginning of the episode, what has been nagging you lately? Where could you use some insight? We're going to then take you through an experience of this passage of the second day of creation and turn your contemplative practice in certain ways that may just open you up to insight that, could be kind of wild. So let's simply take a couple deep breaths in, let them out slowly, and let the band prepare us for our Pneuma Divina exercise.
And God said, "Let there be a dome in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters. So God made the dome and separated the waters that were under the dome from the waters that were above the dome. And it was so. And God called the dome sky. And there was evening, and there was morning, the second day.
What have you just heard? What is the overall meaning of this passage? We're about to read this passage for a second time. Now simply listen to the passage and find the word or the phrase that sticks out for you. You don't need to know why it sticks out. Just feel it as you hear it. What is the word or the phrase? And then as you find that, simply think of every iteration of that word or phrase that you can find in your life. If it's sky, then how many shades of sky have you seen? How have you interacted with sky? Think of everything you could think about with respect to sky, or whatever that word or that phrase is.
And God said, "Let there be a dome in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." So God made the dome and separated the waters that were under the dome from the waters that were above the dome. And it was so. God called the dome sky. And there was evening, and there was morning, the second day.
This third reading, listen once more, and this time, take that word or phrase you just identified and place it alongside the question you've brought to the Pneuma reading, and let it speak to your question in whatever way it will.
And God said, "Let there be a dome in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." So God made the dome and separated the waters that were under the dome from the waters that were above the dome. And it was so. And God called the dome sky. And there was evening, and there was morning, the second day.
about to hear the passage one last time. After you hear the passage, then consider whatever decisions you may be moved to make as a result of the conversation between that word or phrase. Now, if no decisions have come forward, simply continue the conversation between the word or phrase and your question.
And God said, "Let there be a dome in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." So God made the dome and separated the waters that were under the dome from the waters that were above the dome. And it was so. God called the dome sky. And there was evening and there was morning the second day.
Well, at this time, we want to simply turn back to the band, and they're going to offer the musical feature. But as they do so, you may want to continue to let this exercise work its way out within you. But if also, we invite you to share any insights or experience of this passage that may have come to you both online and in the coffee house tonight. We invite you to share either questions to our Skype guest or experiences you've had, insights you've had that may be worthy of holding up to the community. Share them on the live chat, and when we return with Megan Pritchard and you after the band feature. You know, one of the things that I was thinking about during that that reading, I was reflecting actually after the reading and looking at some of the online chat, and somebody had brought up the notion of dualism and how the passage, you know, separating the waters above and the waters below and creating that dome introduces this concept not only of the continuity between ourselves and God, if this is God's self-revelation, but also the separateness, that there is a sense of separateness as well. And oftentimes, you know, in the environmental movement, which I also have been a part for many years, we tend to emphasize the continuity between ourselves and God, and seeing that as a necessary correction for that dualistic principle that has driven so many people to see nature as totally other than ourselves. But there is something helpful also to recognize in that sense of otherness as well that can be helpful if we will consider it from another angle. I have in my study at my church this. This is now. Please don't write me any letters for having an actual alligator head here. This is not the endangered kind, and it's not. I received it as a gift, and I realized early on never to accept or look a gift alligator in the mouth. But I have this in my study. This is from New Orleans. I have this in my study because it reminds me of not only that I am genetically related to this thing, you know, like a huge percentage of our DNA are shared in common with this, you know, with all of the animals of creation, but also that we are separate from creation in the sense that, like this alligator, its interests are not necessarily my own, and it has other agendas that are not necessarily my own, and creation itself is not simply, we're not so much a part of it that creation just does whatever our bidding is, that it has its own agenda as well that is different from perhaps our own personal or private agendas. So this helps remind me of that sense of wildness. It's not just simply you know, always, you know, easy, and it's not always tame, and it's not always comfortable. And sometimes it means looking and honoring an agenda that is not necessarily your own personal one. Well, Chris, what kind of responses did we get from our internet folks?
Well, funny you should ask that, since you just did describe quite a bit of it already on that dualism conversation, so that's good. But there are some other things that have come up. In reading the 4 different Pneuma texts, it gives us a chance to just shout out some stuff that they've been feeling and thinking about. And a concept that Israel brought up was the dome separated the waters from above and below, which is the atmosphere. Without it, rain does not happen. And then somebody else responded, yes, we live in that zone, a threshold between the waters. God separates the chaotic water to allow us space to be wild co-creators.
That's excellent. That reminds me, that those waters that were said to be separated were those primordial waters of chaos, and yet so there seems to be also, if this is a self-revelation of God, and also a revelation of the kind of the way reality works, not in a scientific way, but in a poetic way, then perhaps when we sense those calls into wildness, it's not a call into chaos. You know, the chaos is actually kept apart, you know, from us, but it is a call to experience in the world in a more raw way, in a more vulnerable way.
And I think the images of the waters moving and having their place in the creation of things, even in their movement, is to speak directly to that idea of fixity being stale and stagnant and all that, and that in the movement the spirit is still going without being necessarily chaotic. Yeah.
Great.
Good images.
Yeah.
We do have one question for Megan, too, if we have time for that.
Let's bring Megan back, too, and we also want to acknowledge the coffee house, too, if you have comments or questions here, too. Just simply raise your hand, and we will get to you. Megan?
Yes.
All right. We have a question for you.
Hey, Megan, there was a question. Well, it's for you too, Eric. So it isn't a matter of perhaps that we've lost our way, but rather we're reclaiming it, remembering what that's really all about. So the sense that this environmental care, the calling for the earth is not necessarily something that we lost in a fall somewhere, but rather we're rediscovering our connection to what is already there. Is that what you all are trying to say? And how do you talk about that in connection with some of the Genesis story of the garden and some other things? How do you talk about reclaiming stuff rather than discovering something altogether new?
Okay.
Well, I think we cannot work to save something that we are not connected to, that we don't feel something for, that we're not in relationship with in some way. One of the things that I do every summer is go to my family's lake cabin, and one of my favorite things is to go out early in the morning before all the motorboats get out on the water and people go skiing, and that's all really fun. But when the water's just all glassy, and I get out in my kayak and I go slip over to the next bay, which is a conservation area, and I just sit and I watch and I take my binoculars, and there are bald eagles and osprey and frogs and carp and sunfish and deer and red-winged blackbirds, and I just sit over there and sort of steep in it for a couple of hours sometimes and feel that I'm just one small tiny piece of the landscape, but this whole landscape is going on without me. And how do I connect to it? And so I think it's really important to spend some time doing things like that. The other thing I wanted to say is on the pneuma. I was thinking about the dome, and one of the people mentioned the atmosphere, and the atmosphere and the water is where we are seeing climate change play out in some really significant ways. We've got the climate change scientist James Hansen has said if we go above 350 parts per million of carbon emissions in the atmosphere, we are changing the planet in ways that we can't then go back. We have to get back under 350. And right now we're around 395 and climbing. So we've blown well past 350, and so this is part of our creation care. Is we have to care about this. This is our home. This is what supports us. If we are not caring about it, we're really in some serious trouble. So then we think about how can we be co-creators or healers with God. Very present to the rhythms and the seasons and the natural cycles all around us, and be connecting to those in ways that then can be helpful to bring that carbon emission number back down. Also, the acidification of the oceans, where shellfish cannot form hard shells, and I know here in Puget Sound already they've moved some of their oyster bed operations over to Hawaii because Puget Sound is getting too acidic for the baby shellfish to grow their shells hard. Wow. So so we're really connecting to the planet and caring about it is really crucial, because we are changing it so much. So that your alligator head there, if we're concerned about the alligators and letting the alligators be on their own agenda, as you said, and do the things that they need to do, we need to have a healthy landscape in which they can do that. Sally McFaig in the book I mentioned earlier, A New Climate for Theology, she says, if we consider ourselves being at the top of the food chain, that doesn't mean that we are in control of the rest of the food chain. It means that we are expendable. If we went away, the earth would be fine without us, and so would all the other creatures. But if they went away, we cannot survive without them. So everything is related. And the more that we understand that, and the more that that's a part of our theology, the more that we can care about what happens to the rest of the planet.
Yeah, well put. Okay, do we have somebody from the coffee house, or
Yeah.
question or comment from the coffee house? Oh, they're gonna be shy. Well, let's take
Everybody's
one more
being
from the
shy.
internet then.
Yeah, the question for Megan is, how does a thoughtful spiritual person determine when am I doing enough? Is it possible, or is there a different way to think about it? How do you know when you're trying to do enough?
Well, I think I'm not sure we can ever do enough because the problem is so big and the challenges are so great. But we do as much as we can, knowing that it is not up to us individually to fix the entire problem. But knowing that if we do everything that we can and other people are doing everything that they can, that we can make a difference. But ultimately, it is God's. So it is beyond us to really control. In the same way that we tried to control creation in order to make it do what we wanted it to do, now if we are trying to control creation in order to heal it, it's bigger than what we can address all on our own. There's got to be God in the picture too, working as healer. So one of the things that we can think about is that if 3-5 years from now, we as progressive Christians really want to be identified with people who care passionately about environmental justice, what can we be doing right now to make that happen? Can we be telling our friends? Can we be organizing, community gardens? What are the things that we can be doing to live into that vision of a healed earth and a healthy planet as if it were here?
Yeah.
To be co-creators with God and healers, but knowing that God has to be part of it too.
Yeah. In the progressive Christian movement, of which I've been a part for many, many years, there's a lot of people who are really burnt out. They've been doing so many good works for Jesus, so to speak, or God, that they're completely burnt out. And I think that this passage actually is really helpful in that respect, that if we just flood our lives with every kind of way we could be helpful, it's like bringing the waters of chaos back, just filling the whole thing. But God actually creates space, creates space to breathe. And, when I think about your path with walking across the country, you felt a call to do something. First of all, it was a call. You felt this wild energy of a call. And also you had to let go then of a lot of things in order to do the new thing. And so following a call, doing the thing, is also as much about saying no or letting go as it is say yes or taking on.
And I guess one of the clarifying things there is that I made some sacrifices in order to do that, and so did you, and so did all of us. And they didn't feel like sacrifices.
Right.
So because it felt like I was doing something that I really was called to do, and I was very excited about it. And I don't know if you remember, but by the end of the walk, most people were like, "Oh, I'm going to be glad when this walk is over." And I was like, "No, don't let it end. I want to get this
That's right.
going forever."
It was great, yeah. Well, Megan, it's been... They're calling for a new one.
The folks online want to do a convergence crosswalk.
There we go.
There you go.
All right. Well, maybe we'll have to consider that. But I'll just mention also that the person who had suggested the ministry to you, Scott Grissell, you named him, who was filming the walk. A documentary film called The Asphalt Gospel was produced from that, and Scott Grissell is the producer of Darkwood Brew now. So, small world, huh?
Well, all
You
of
never
our
know.
paths changed.
You never know what may happen when you follow the wild call of God. Well, Megan, it's been a pleasure to have you with us this evening, and we'll look forward to keeping track of the UCC's Mission 401 Earth campaign too, and contributing some hours and some letters, and perhaps even planting a few trees.
Thanks so much for having me on.
All right. Well, every week at Darkwood Brew, that we really bring our episode together in the ritual of communion. You may be online, but we extend that invitation to you as well. The band's just going to provide a bit of a transition for us, and we invite you to take some, if you got bread and wine at home, or juice and crackers, or whatever elements you may bring to the table. We're going to be preparing them here too, and invite you to join us in this sacred meal. Thanks, guys. Well, I think I want to have a alligator head next to the communion elements for every meal. It reminds me that in Jesus' own path too, that he recognized that wildness of God too, and realized that God's overview and God's agenda in the world was greater than any of us. And so we remember him even praying in the garden, take this cup from me, yet not my will, but thy will be done. Your agenda, not simply mine. And in following that sense of call, Jesus had to give up something pretty dear as well, himself. And yet, through doing that, he created a space for you and I, a space for you and I to come into that presence of God in a special way in this meal, in which we're reminded that on a night of betrayal and desertion, Jesus took bread and like the waters of chaos, he broke it, he separated that bread and created that space, saying, my friends, this is my body, which is broken for you. Do this as often as you eat of it in remembrance of me. And so likewise, after supper, he took the cup, saying, this is the cup of the new covenant in my blood. Do this as often as you drink of it in remembrance of me. By eating this bread and drinking this cup, we remember Christ's death. We celebrate Christ's resurrection. And this all comes full circle. We realize that the fruits of the earth have become our spiritual food. That the relationship between spirit and matter is not as distant as we often conceive it to be. That those acts which bring us most fully alive in this world also bring us closest to divinity, and perhaps in part of becoming most fully alive for ourselves as human beings means allowing the creation, the created order, to be fully itself as well. These are the gifts of God for the people of God. We invite you to join us in the feast of creation. Well, we thank you for joining us this evening. Hope you found this episode helpful. By the way, if you're interested in that walk across the country that Megan participated in, as well as myself and Scott Grissell, you can find a copy of the documentary film that Scott Grissell produced at livingthequestions.com. That's the Asphalt Gospel at livingthequestions.com. Next week, we are very pleased to be joined by activist Kit Evans, who is a Pacific School of Religion graduate and also is the executive director of testimoniesofhope.org. So look forward to being joined by Kit Evans next week as we continue our exploration of the 7 days of creation with Day 3. Until then, may the Spirit of the living God made known to us most fully in Jesus Christ our Lord, go before you to show you the way, go above you to watch over you, go behind you to push you into places you may not necessarily go yourself, go beneath you to uphold you and uplift you, go beside you to be your strong companion, and dwell within you to remind you that you are surely not alone, and you are loved beyond your wildest imagination. And may the fire of God's blessing burn brightly upon you and within you, now and always. Amen.